All right, welcome back to Western Civ. We've been discussing the Protestant Reformation. We've gone from Luther to Zwingli to the Anabaptists to Henry VIII to Elizabeth. And now we drop back to the continent. We turn our attention to France and a man named John Calvin. Your book might call him John Calvin. I prefer that you know him as Jean Calvin because he's French. He is a priest in Paris at the time all this is happening, and he's watching what's going on. A very well-educated man, very bright. In fact, he's in the royal court. He gives church ceremonies and church sermons to the King of France. And so he begins to hear of Luther and what's happening in England and whatnot, and he begins to bring some of these ideas into France and say, well, maybe they're not all bad, you know, where they've cut ties with the Pope, maybe we could too, and France would be different. Well, when the king hears about this, he will be exiled from France. Kings of France do not want this. They basically have an exemption from the Pope, and they want to maintain that. They don't want to break, because even if you break with the Pope, it causes a lot of civil war inside the state. Inside of Germany, a lot of fighting. Inside of England, a lot of fighting, and France does not want this, or kings don't want this. So he'll be driven out of France. He will seek refuge in Geneva. Now, Geneva is a Swiss city in one of the Swiss states, and the Swiss have already been Protestant, and it's hard to get there. So it's in Geneva that he finds his following. He begins as a priest there, and the people begin to support him, and he will design his own church. This is called the Reformed Church of John Calvin, or the Calvinist Church, what we call it the Reformed Church. 1536. So as Henry VIII is already underway up there in England, now comes the Reformed Church, enters Europe. What is the Reformed Church? Well, it is very close to Luther. Calvin, watching Luther do his thing, watching Zwingli do his thing. Again, we'll follow with Luther. The idea is all you need is faith alone. Simple religion, just be a Christian, and that should be pretty much good enough. He gets it down to 2 sacraments. You don't need all 7 of them. 2 of them is fine. Again, which ones are actually in the Bible? Well, Jesus was baptized, so that should be continued. And then Jesus had a Last Supper, so that should be continued. Those are the 2 sacraments. That's all you really need. Faith alone, and then these 2 sacraments. Well, he continues on from that. As you're under attack here, and everyone's fighting over religion, well, he turns Geneva into a model society. That's the best way to have a church, is to make sure that everyone in the community is on board. There are no bad people, so there'll be no sin among us, among these people. Well, in this model community, they will enforce a moral discipline. If you are not a good person, you will need to leave town. You'll be given one warning. You know, if you do commit a crime or commit a sin, you'll be publicly humiliated, put in the stocks, or whipped. And then if you do it again, you'll have to leave. They'll run you out of town. So the men in charge of this moral discipline are called presbyters, these elder men of the town who have proven their dedication and proven their uprightness. They will watch over the city to make sure that everyone else is a good person. Now, let's look at Calvinism. What is Calvin preaching besides his model community and enforcement of discipline? Calvinism is known pretty much by this one word, predestination. This is a new philosophy. This is going to radicalize everything now. Predestination, look at the word. Predestined. Now what this means is basically fate. Things are fated. And here's the proof, he says. Well, God is all-knowing. If God is all-knowing and God is all-powerful, then he's not randomly doing things. He's not hoping things turn out. Everything's been written in stone. You don't have free will. When he created the earth, everything will go as he already knew it would go. You don't really have free will. Everything is fated by God. He's already determined this. So some people are bad. As a way to explain sin, well, that's the explanation, is that there are bad people. God designed it that way. They're called the reprobate, bad people, sinful people. They are damned. They're going to hell. There's nothing they can do about it. God planned it this way. And then others people are saved. They are the elect. They will be going to heaven. Well, this seems very strange, you know. In fact, you might be looking at this going, well, I don't agree with that. Well, philosophically, you can't prove one way or the other whether things are fated or free will. But here's an attempt to say, look, this is an explanation of fate because this is the way it is. You know, what explains evil, explains sin. This is the way God designed it. Well, how do you know what side you're on? How do you know if you're damned or saved? There are signs of your salvation. You can actually tell a little bit, get some hints from God, whether or not you're saved or damned. Well, here's some of the signs. Your faith. If you are a Christian, that's a pretty good sign that you're saved. But then also your life. How do you lead your life? If you lead a godly life, That's a good sign that you're saved. Do you attack sin? Do you get out and do what Jesus did? Jesus attacked sin and tried to fight against evil. So those would be good signs that you're saved. Of course, the other signs would be just the opposite. If you're not faithful, if you don't lead a godly life, and if you are sinful, these are signs that you're going to hell. So later on, Calvinism will change over time. And later on, one of the most important signs of your salvation is that in part of God's will, part of God's plan, is your success in life. If you are successful in life, that is a sign of your salvation. Things like being healthy, being wealthy, being wise. Sounds like Ben Franklin there. That would be a sign that God likes you. God planned this for you. Of course, the opposite would be a sign that maybe you're going to hell. If you're always sick, if you're always poor, and if you make bad decisions, those aren't good signs for you. Other signs, if you work hard, people who work hard, an idle hands of the devil's workshop. So a man who works all the time, that's a sign of your salvation. If you raise good kids, that's a sign of your salvation. And here's another one. Jesus went out and sought converts, so you should get out and seek converts. Now this is huge for Calvinism because look at what we've been talking about. Catholicism, up to 1517, everybody was pretty much a Catholic. So you don't need to seek converts. After 1517, Lutheranism is kind of a German thing. Zwinglianism is kind of a Swiss thing. The Anabaptists traveled around a little bit. Church of England, it's an English thing. This is going to be all over Europe as these people begin to spread, and it's upon them as a sign of salvation that you need to draw people in. You need to get out and spread the word. And Calvinism is going to spread like wildfire all over Europe. You haven't seen this kind of thing since Islam, really. An idea of religion that you need to get out there and preach it. From Geneva, it is going to spread into France. Now, not all of France, just from Geneva into the south of France, and then over to the west. So it kind of dips into south and west of France. Just away from Paris. Paris is in the north where the king is, and he doesn't like this. But in the south, you can kind of get away with it. So it's kind of a western and southwestern kind. Now, what sort of people are going to be drawn to Calvinism? Well, healthy, wealthy, and wise people. A lot of bourgeoisie, a lot of wealthy people will see this as here's a new philosophy. Here's an understanding of why you're wealthy. It's not a sin to have money. It's actually a sign of salvation to have money. The fact that you work hard all the time, that's a sign of your salvation. The fact that your kids are doing well is a sign of your salvation. And also a lot of nobles. It will draw nobles to it. Nobles can say, hey, my family's been successful for generations. That's definitely a sign of salvation. So in France, these Calvinists of the Reformed Church will be known as Huguenots or Huguenots. Many of these will be coming over to Alabama later on. So here in Alabama, you can call them Huguenots because that's what we call them over here. But in France, they're Huguenots. So this will be a radical transformation. Not a huge transformation, maybe 10%. Maybe 10% of French will be Calvinist, but more in the south of France. They will also head from Geneva to the Rhine River, and then down the Rhine River to the north of Europe. So the German states along the Rhine River, from Switzerland north, a lot of Germans will get involved with Calvinism. If you're a Lutheran, well, here's the next step. Now, what kind of people would be drawn? Again, burghers. Like bourgeoisie in France, burghers in the German states, burghers who are wealthy and successful. And then you also need to be educated because, well, this is a philosophy. You can't, a lot of uneducated people won't want to go with this because it requires you to actually read some books and understand philosophy. And then eventually we'll reach the Netherlands. We'll reach Holland, a place where you can kind of do your own thing. And so a lot of people will be drawn to Calvinism. Very successful Dutch up there and very urban Dutch. And then from there, it'll jump over to England. Yes, it'll actually make its way into England. Now, England has a Church of England already, but a lot of Calvinist ideas will start to work their way. This idea of predestination, this idea of having money as a sign of salvation, predestination, will work their way into the Church of England. And then one more place I want to mention is Scotland. Calvinism will make the jump to Scotland. In fact, the entire area of Scotland, north of England, will become pretty much 100% Presbyterian. And the man who brings it to Scotland, pretty much a one-man gang, John Knox, a disciple of John Calvin will head back to Scotland and pretty much single-handedly convert that entire area, all these kilt-wearing people up there and their sheep, to Calvinism.